practices we discussed that we're currently doing is we kind of have like a classroom contract that all the students come together and discuss what behavioral expectations and things in the class. We all agree, sign it, and then everybody's on the same page.
Great. Thank you, Josh, for modeling standing up and using your voice. So, Emma, you wanted to go second.
I'm at Portland High, and we have a lot of different populations at work. So what I was saying, actually Michelle said a really good thing. I don't remember it really though, so you have to I just know that it triggered in me. She was talking about profiles and creating a family space where vulnerable things are said to be inclusive, but I also reflected on the fact that when we're doing profiles, I think we often profile. We make assumptions based on, I definitely do that, and not, again, it's not, I was telling them it's not something that I say out loud, but in my own mind. And I think when we do this type of work, it's really important to not just say like what we're doing well, but to say, oh, I think I do that and I shouldn't be doing that, and to say it out loud to the group. So the example that I gave was that, so again, in Portland High School we have a lot of different populations from different countries. We have a lot of multilingual families, and the example I gave was that, so 99% of multilingual families get free and reduced lunch. But I said, when she said profile, I said, well, actually though, I think I know that that's true, but there's still a 1% that doesn't. So it's not right for me, and it's not inclusive for me to assume that when I'm doing my profiles and I'm going to the economically disadvantaged, to assume that because this kid comes from a multilingual family that they are economically disadvantaged, or that they get free or reduced lunch. Just because it's, again, 99% doesn't mean that it's everyone. It doesn't mean that it's just a group that we can group all together, and you know. So that was my reflection. You had a nicer thing to say.
That's awesome. No, thank you. And I appreciate that's again showing vulnerability, and that's what we want. We want to do better, so we've got to admit where we can do better. So that's a perfect example of something to be mindful of. So thank you, Emma. Elizabeth, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, so we talked about a bunch of different things within our classroom, but the last thing we just mentioned is that we also identify our shortcomings as well, and things that, like, just because of who we are as a person, we're not going to connect with all of our students. So making sure that you're finding that person within your community that they do, like certain students do connect with, and find that way that, like, we can have a mutual respect, but I also know you can confide in this other person, and like I'm going to be that support for you, but I know that I'm not that person for you, and it might be just because of who I am. And so we talked about that too, as some of the like shortfalls as well, and how that being inclusive is also being mindful about, like, you're not going to reach all those people, and so you have to respect that and then find a way to do that as support.
Yes. Great example. See, I knew the South was going to rock it. This is awesome. All right, in the back.
So Eliza and I had a great conversation about how to build an inclusive classroom. It starts right on the first day and what your classroom culture is, and it's foundational. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. It's about relationships. So if in September you're incentivizing students to participate and honoring the things that they say, and really incentivizing participation from all the various voices in your classroom, after you build that safe community, over time you can really tackle some of these more difficult, thorny issues because you've built that mutual respect, not just between teacher and student, but between the students themselves, making it a safer place to have these sorts of conversations.
Great, thank you. Awesome. Okay, one more. We have one more. Michelle?
I was just going to say that in my classroom, I often say at the very beginning, from the outset, that what happens in the classroom or the stories that are told in terms of, you know, people being vulnerable are their stories. And so in this classroom, it's never your place to go out and tell somebody else's story among, you know, your schoolmates. So for me, the inclusivity means that, listen, I do have this issue, I am vulnerable, and so therefore I'm sharing it with you guys, so the family vibe in my room is that it's my story, and please don't go out and tell everybody else it. And for me, that means everybody feels safe enough to be able to talk about sometimes very difficult things. We talk about values and whatever else, profiles and things like that, because I don't want to make it like this is just about you and why are you in this class? We're all in this class together, and so we have to be somewhat vulnerable throughout our year together. So that's really, I think it's almost implicit, that's what I was saying from the very beginning. It's never an option. And if I do hear somebody talking about what happens in the classroom, like someone else's story, it's addressed right away. It's not shoved off.
Great.
And that could be about prejudice, it could be about anything. It's addressed right away in the classroom.
Awesome. Great. Okay, great. Well, it sounds like we've got a good start here and everyone's doing some great things already. I'm going to turn things over now to Ivy.
Hello. It's on. It's on the top. Hello. I'm Ivy Latendris. I'm the J&D specialist at Richmond High School. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about inclusion. As we talked, or I should say, you guys did a really great job sharing examples. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate the definition of inclusion and also talk about we all do team building activities and things at the start of our school year in our J&D classrooms. We do a lot of work to make sure that our J&D classrooms are inclusive. So I just encourage you to try to come up with some more ideas after we talk about this that you can bring back to your classroom. And so one thing I kind of wanted to address too is that when our communities lack diversity, we need to be prepared to meet the needs of all students. And when we do have diversity in our communities, we might not see or know how to be as inclusive as we could. For example, when I started at JMG 7 years ago, I thought I was doing a great job. I had a little safe space sticker on my door. I addressed every slur, inappropriate comment, or joke, although we don't say that here. And then I had a trans student come out to me, and we learned a lot together about how to make our classroom, our program, our school more inclusive. So I would just encourage you to kind of think of where you're at and try to come up with some ideas of how to do that. So implicit bias is not a new concept. We all have biases that we come to our professional lives with. So this video is just to get you thinking some more about that.
What is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes the shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term right here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racism.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an over-representation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias.
So I'm going to move on to microaggressions as well. So teachers and students are responsible for the words and language that we use, even though they don't intend to do any harm. So I would like you to approach this video on microaggressions. There may be some things that you recognize that you might have said with good intentions. So I would just ask you to reflect about and just have some grace and understand that you might have said something that you didn't mean any harm by, but we would like you to just think about and learn from that experience and just be aware of microaggressions.
I guess I'm still learning how to deal with microaggressions with mental illness and being a Black woman. It's something that I've always had.
The majority of the microaggressions that I've experienced in my life are related to being half Japanese. People often say that I am pretty far out Black girl, for example.
Oh my God, Kiana, like I'm Black when you are, Kiana. Like, oh my God.
From your name, I thought you'd be a little Jap walking off the streets.
Oh, you're super pretty for a Black girl.
You know, a lot of people, they want to like touch hair. It's one of the actions where they're just like, oh, can I see your hair? And they just go and like pet it. When you pet something, you know, you pet animals. You know, like, we're humans, we're not animals.
The biggest one I get all the time is, what are you? What are you? And then they rattle off, because I'm so ethnically ambiguous, they rattle off this list. I'm like, oh, you're Mexican, Native American, Puerto Rican, why do we know that? I don't think it necessarily changes my intelligence or anything like that. It's just that you can put in a nice box.
It's disheartening to have people tell you you don't look like a particular group of people that you don't self-identify with. It's hard because I do self-identify as Hispanic. I was born in Chile in South America. I feel like how Chilean can I get? You know, I don't know what else to do.
But then I try to model correct behavior. So if somebody says, where are you from? I will say, well, I grew up in California. But if you're talking about my ancestry, I'm Korean.
I have definitely experienced microaggressions the way that I look, whether it's like body type especially. I think that's maybe one of the hardest.
I think it's a reality of privilege that you don't have to notice microaggressions.
What gives me a sense of agency to address microaggressions is honestly the identities that I have that are privileged. I think sometimes when a microaggression is done to me or others, I'm pretty quick to respond back or to clap back. But I often think sometimes that's hard to do. There are those times where you want to educate that person, and there are those times where you just want to run away, but there's sometimes where you just have to have a good laugh.
I wasn't strong enough to say like, what the heck? Like, what was, like, why did you say that? I wasn't strong enough to say that, and so I just had to like internalize my hurt and then kind of move on.
A lot of times I don't think that people are trying to, what you say, send microaggressions on purpose. I think that a lot of times microaggressions are, you're just not educated on what needs to be said or what you should say.
I think a lot of times people really just don't understand the impact of their words or their comments or something that has become a colloquialism in regularly exchanged conversation in our culture. A lot of times microaggressions are unconscious and people don't realize the impact, and a lot of times that wasn't their intent at all. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter about intent because it matters about how it impacted you. Trying to help students to understand that we all have biases. They may not necessarily be, you may not necessarily know them, and know exactly what they are, but I think we all have them. And once we can learn to understand those biases, I think that would be an important first step to understanding other people and their life experiences. When I get challenged, it's hard and I feel embarrassed, and I'm somebody who thinks about that a lot, but I also want to honor the fact that I was the one who made that impact on the students. So you think about intent versus impact.
I think it's hugely important not to let that microaggression just pass by without anything being said. Because being silent is, to me, as an educator, stating that you agree with that particular microaggression.
So communication is important, and as educators, we try to have an inclusive classroom. So I just ask you to think about the intent with your words as well as the impact. Steph Perkins, girl.
Good morning, everyone. You are with me. Awesome. So, I'm Stephanie Perkins. I teach at Madison High School. I want you all to look at the picture on the screen. Think about what might be going on in this picture. What words or phrases do you associate with the picture that you're looking at? You can write them down, or you can just think about it. Now let's look at the bigger picture. How do those assumptions change? How are you adjusting your assumptions based on seeing the full picture? I think as educators, we need to realize that sometimes we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And to be careful of our assumptions that we're making. So I have a story for you. A young boy gets into a car accident with his father. He ends up at a trauma center in need of an urgent operation. The surgeon sees him and approaches the boy and his father and says, "I can't operate on him. He's my son. How can this be?" Any ideas from the crowd?
Father is a surgeon.
Awesome. How many of you went there? The mom is the surgeon. Awesome. So we just talked about implicit bias and how we might have those associations. Some of us might have not gone there, right? We might have that association that a surgeon is going to be male, but could be female, right? Any other ideas of how this could be?
My brain went to, he also has to have two fathers.
Yes, awesome.
Now that you say that, you have like an implicit bias about surgeons being male, that also points something out too.
That's awesome. Thank you, Julie. So if you didn't hear that, Julie said that maybe he has two fathers. So there's another association there. So it's just important for us to examine those implicit bias. We all have them. What associations do we make, and just to be conscious of that. So we're going to take a moment to debrief. At your tables, discuss how does implicit bias or microaggressions have an effect on marginalized students in your school. Maybe you can think of an example of something that happened either in your school or maybe in your classroom. So I'll give you 2 minutes to discuss and then we'll share out. Maybe you have an example from your school or classroom you're willing to share. Yes, in the book.
So, in Gorham, and maybe Ryan will agree or disagree with this, but it's a really small percentage of students who are non-white, and I think among some staff and students, there's an assumption that those non-white students, especially who are new, are probably like in the ESL class, when in some cases they are, in some cases they're not.
Okay, great, thank you. Awesome, so making assumptions based on race of those.
I thought that within our conversation, an important thing to point out is that Michelle was talking about scenarios where I think we say a lot to ourselves. I'm not racist. I'm the least racist person. But to remember that racism, implicit bias, microaggressions against people in a racial way is racism, and racism is action and inaction. It's not necessarily your identity. So we were saying at our table that we've done things that are racist. You know, if you have a device, you're doing something that's racist, so to sort of reflect on that and flip it so that you're not doing that. And so we were talking about that at our table. I just think it's important to point out that is a thing that we have to sort of change our minds to. Just because we say we're not racist, we're the least racist person, or we're very liberal, doesn't mean that you're not doing something racist.
Yes, thank you. So sometimes inaction, right? It showed that in the video that we're watching. Being silent is sometimes agreeing, but also we have those underlying biases, and just changing our mindset. It might not necessarily be things we're doing, it might be things we're thinking or saying as well. Thank you, that was a great point. Anyone else want to share?
When I was in the classroom, it became clear, I have an art background and I love noticing, like, got my complementary color, somebody noticed that about me today. And I started to realize that I was complimenting some students on what they were wearing. And I've shared this with a few of my specialists before. And I had I don't know what grade she was, but I had her in 7th grade, 8th grade, and I think maybe 9th grade. And she said, "Miss Porter, you are so rich." And I didn't know what she meant by that at first. And I had many times told her I got this in Goodwill. And I told her that many times, but it never really went in. And she just noticed that I would pay attention to people, what they wore, if it was new. And that's what she was taking in. And I see that, and I realized that at one point that, wow, she thinks that I'm, so much more well off than she is, and that's the only thing she's taking in. And it was something that I had to change, the way I spoke to kids and the compliments about some of those physical, or not physical, but what they wore. Because that was very much in their psyche, like, I don't have new shoes, or I don't have, things like that. So it was very quick for me to try to change that.
Thank you. That's an awesome example, especially because we are working with students that are economically disadvantaged. So being conscious of those biases as well. So thank you very much. Next up, we have Shane, who's going to speak about diversity.
Shane, I was going to jump up ahead of him, so I apologize. In your handouts also, there's a resource guide. I just wanted to bring your attention to it because a lot of what you guys are sharing is around the implicit bias video, and there is a link, and I'll share more how you get to those links later, but there's these implicit bias tests that you can take online, and it's an association test and how your brain kind of can start to build and create these associations, and then it breaks down for you where your blind spots or your biases might be, and they have them on gender, race, sexism, all those kind of where you might lean towards, what your biases might be. And again, back to that quote that we shared: when you know better, you can do better. So that's definitely not mine. That's just my voice. So I just we'll talk more about the resource guide, but I just wanted to bring your attention to that resource guide that will be up there. Shane.
Good morning. Oh, we're going to play this game today, okay. Red light. I don't know what red light means. Oh, kind of on. Use the other one. Got it. I am super loud, so I could just yell.
I think you got it. I don't think you need that.
Many years in the theater. Okay, how about now? We good?
Great.
All right, so my name is Shane Boyce, and I'm the specialist at Bucksport High School, which means I think I'm the only person in the room from North Region. So I know we don't always have great blood between us, but it's fine. I do actually have a confession. I was born and raised in Wiscasset, Maine, so I am kind of one of you. So, hi family. Miss you guys. Okay, I think we need a little wake up, and I'm not going to make you do the embarrassing thing I had North Region do yesterday. So instead, I'm going to tell you a dad joke. You ready? Today, my son asked me, "Can I have a bookmark?" And I burst into tears. 11 years old, and he still doesn't know that my name is Shane! Get it? Bookmark. Okay, so it's been embarrassing. That was a flop. So let's move on with the show, shall we? We've been using this word diversity a lot today, but what does it really mean? So I'm going to ask you to think about, for each of you, and you can discuss on your table if you want, but I'm not going to give you that long. Just think of your answer in your head. What does diversity mean to you? So take a couple seconds and think on it. Ding, 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 time's up. So for us, this is kind of our working definition of diversity. Diversity are the characteristics that make us different. Diversity includes differences in ability, age, gender, religion, cultures, race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and so on. I want to make an important point here. Diversity and difference go hand in hand. I think there's a misperception out there that difference is bad, that it's not great to be different. But I would argue, as I think many others would, that our differences help make us stronger as a group, as a team, as a society, as a family. I'm not going to let this go. Take it up. So diversity allows us to acknowledge and celebrate uniqueness and learn from what makes us different. Now for the statistics, my favorite part. I'm going to talk to you today about racial diversity at JMG. Approximately 600 of our JMG students are Black, Indigenous, and or people of color, or you might see the acronym BIPOC. That number, 600, represents 16% of JMG's total roster. Internally, in our company, 7% of our JMG employees are BIPOC. This mirrors the state of Maine percentage of residents who identify as BIPOC. This group can include Native American, Asian, Hispanic, African, Black, and multiracial, and includes both students born here and recent immigrants. At this point, I'm going to call up Kim Lip to talk a little bit more about what JMG has been doing, both internally and externally, to increase our racial diversity. So let's give a warm welcome to Kim.
Can you hear me? Everybody in the back too, if I just project? Great. Thank you to the Idea Committee for asking this important question. So over the summer, I think many of you saw a lot of different companies and organizations make statements regarding their commitment to practicing inclusion so they could achieve diversity and working toward putting equity into action. And so we felt like at JMG, it was important for us to restate our commitment. And that was the very first statement you saw, the very first slide. think what's important about that is we were restating it. Those were not new words for us, and JMG has always been committed to achieving equity for marginalized students. You also, and we know we can do better, right? We're going to continue to do better. We're also an organization of action, and this is something that I think connects us all. When we make a commitment to something, we want to take action to make a difference. And when we look at equity, and I'm going to talk specifically about racial equity, one of the many ways to measure in education in our space, if you're successful, if you're making strides in achieving racial equity, it's to look at some of the statistics regarding achievement gaps, right? So are our students of color graduating at the same rate as white students? Are they doing as well on test scores? Do they have as many opportunities to be in advanced classes and AP classes as white students do? And all of those measurements are incredibly important. We do look at those outcomes in our own statistics. I did send out a memo in the beginning of June this summer that talked about that aspect of racial equity, and also shared the last outcomes that we had done, which was in May of 2019. And that was, again, looking at outcomes through the lens of our students of color. If you didn't see it, it is in your folders, those documents. And our next report on our outcomes for through, again, the lens of race will be coming out hopefully this month. Our researcher, Mike Liver, is working on updating that memo. Another very important way in achieving racial equity and in practicing inclusion and embracing racial diversity is to lift up leaders and even to create new leadership positions for people who represent diverse backgrounds. And so we really started working toward this in 2008. Over the years, you've heard us talk about, those who've been here, heard us talk about for that long, the Nellie Mae Grant. And the Nellie Mae Grant was a 10-year grant. It was $9 million, and it was to work with Portland public school systems and putting student practices system-wide. When we went into that work, we realized we needed leadership from a diverse number of audiences, that there were not a lot of people of color who were leading initiatives to achieve greater diversity. So the first person that we met in doing this work, Craig and I met this gentleman named Pius Ali. Pius had immigrated to the United States in the year 2000 from Ghana. In 2008, he was a very committed community volunteer. He was working diligently with the Immigrant and Refugee Committee. As parents, he had young daughters in school, Portland Public Schools, and he was working with other parents. We went to him to seek his advice and his perspective and his leadership. And ultimately, we raised money through Nellie Mae. We got a second grant from Nellie Mae to create a full-time position at the Muskie Institute for Pius to serve as this liaison to the refugee and immigrant community as we were working to make the systems change. Another person we met was a gentleman named Abaduli Ahmed, and we noted he was working as a math teacher in Deering. And in having conversations with him, we thought, we really need a teacher leader in all the schools in Portland Public Schools who's leading the efforts from the education perspective, but through that racial equity lens. And actually, Abduli Ahmed is actually Dr. Ahmed. He immigrated from Somalia, and so he became the teacher leader at Deering. Another gentleman who was a teacher leader at Portland High School was a Spanish teacher named Carlos Gomez. They really, the amount of influence that they had within those schools was incredible. And they went on now, Carlos works in the Portland Public District administrative offices. He's working for, under the superintendent, and he is the director of cultural languages. And Dr. Ahmed was just made this year the principal of Deering High School. We worked with some other individuals, Rachel Talbott Ross, who was leading up the NAACP chapter in Maine. And she asked, could we sponsor, could JMG sponsor, by sponsoring meaning funding, could we find grant funds so that she could host a legislative day at the Maine State Legislature for students of color. And so we did that. We used LMA grants to make that happen. It still happens every day. And now Rachel Talbott Ross recently became the first female African American representative in the state of Maine. I just wanted to ask for a few of these opportunities because in your work, in your students, and looking through the lens of the Career Association, creating opportunities for, it's not just about the achievement gap and making sure students have more opportunities to do well academically. That achievement gap includes lifting up students of color and embracing diversity in leadership as well. And I'm confident that you are all doing that. I just wanted to make the statement of how important it is in this work that we're moving racial equity into action. Louder? You guys can't hear me? Can you hear me still? Okay. And now I just want to quickly turn to these statistics for JMG. We also made that commitment in 2008 that we wanted to advance the diversity of the students that we are serving, of our staff, and of our leadership. So when we began this work, I think it was just under 6% of our students were of color, and now we're at 16%. Shane mentioned the 7% of our employees, and that equals around 7% of Maine is racially diverse. I want to say 2% of people employed in the state of Maine are racially diverse. So we measure the 7 against the 2. We're doing, you know what, we're doing okay, but we know we want to do better, right? I think what's important is we keep looking at those numbers and we keep thinking of strategies and ways to do outreach so we can increase that number. And then with our board of directors, many years ago, several years ago, made a commitment to increasing the diversity of our board. Now, our board looks at a lot of factors when it thinks about diversity. Geographic diversity, we want someone from every county. We want strong educators, strong business leaders, people with finance skills, people with marketing skills, people with governance skills. We look at gender and at racial diversity. The onboarding process for a board of directors can take up to 2 years. And in the next year, Craig and board leadership have been working with a number of individuals to take them through that vetting process. But in this next year, we do plan to bring on 6 new individuals. And of those 6, 3 are individuals of color. So we're very excited that we are making strides in not only diversifying the student body, our employees, but also the leadership of JMG. So thank you for letting me take this time and ask me to do this. And does anybody have any comments about that piece? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. I'm back. I have one last thing to talk to you about today, and and it is the Classroom Audit. So the definition is up on the screen, and I'm going to read it to you just for funsies. A classroom audit is a non-judgmental a classroom audit involves reading the messages conveyed by the images on the walls, the books on the shelves, and the arrangement of the furniture with an eye toward diversity, equity, and student empowerment. The audit also includes considering the types of interactions that teachers have with students and that students have with one another. So, now I'm going to take you on a little guided visualization journey. So if you could, please just close your eyes. In your mind's eye, think about your classroom, or your office, or wherever it is that you work for J&G. Picture it the way it was before the Rona. Ah, yes, there are your students. They're all there, standing closer than 6 feet apart. They're all chatting. Look at your desk setup. Look at your walls. Look at the floor. Look at the faces of your students. Do you remember how happy you were? Now, think very deeply about the way your classroom is decorated. It reflects our personalities in some way, right? In my mind, I see all the SpongeBob pictures that my students have colored and stuck to my walls because for some reason they think I really like SpongeBob. All right, that's enough. Open your eyes. So, now that we've remembered our classrooms the way that they were, I'm going to ask a question. In your visualization, did you do an audit like this? Did you think about ways that diversity is represented in your classroom? If anyone here would like to offer up one thing, maybe something on the wall in your classroom, something in the way that you arrange your seats, whatever it is, something that you think encourages diversity in your classroom, anybody want to share one thing? All the way in the back.
Well, I was thinking about how my seat setup didn't encourage like conversation and being on the same level with students. I had like a desk here, like a monitor here, and my seat was here, and then the student seats were across that desk. And I'm thinking about how like you want to pull those seats in, have it on one side, or pull the teacher seat out, have it on the other side. How that will change could make a huge difference.
Right. So just in case everyone didn't hear, I think Eliza was just talking about the seating arrangement in her classroom and how it's not super conducive to folks being able to get together and talk and share experiences. And sometimes that's great because we don't want everyone talking all the time. It would be really hard to do our jobs. But we do want to think of that kind of thing. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So in my classroom, oftentimes the students sit in a way that looks not diverse, right? They sit among their own friends, whatever. And so I guess I wonder what other specialists do to create that feeling of like, you can't just sit by your friend every single day, like, you know what I mean, without doing like a seating plan, which for high schoolers seems silly.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be able to do a classroom audit and say, I want you guys all to be inclusive and sit around one another, but not have it be forced.
Great question. I'll tell you what I do, and then I'll look for maybe one other answer. Sometimes I do like a mix-it-up day in my classroom, and I take scrapbook paper, a couple of sheets of each pattern, and cut it up into little pieces, and I throw it in like a bag or whatever, and as students come in the door, they pick one out, and you sit next to whoever has the same paper as you. So you're not necessarily going to sit next to your best friend, you might sit next to someone you never talk to. That's what I do. Anybody else have a good method for mixing it up? All right, we'll think on it. So I do just want to share one thing that I do in my classroom that assists with diversity with students feeling accepted and welcome. So I teach at Bucksport High School, which is a small rural school. Not a whole lot of diversity to speak of. However, I did find when I started that I had kind of a large group of LGBTQ plus students that were in my program or that had sought me out as the first openly bi member of my school community, the first LGBTQ plus teacher in almost my whole district. So I had students who sought me out for belonging, for mentorship. So I said, okay, something tells me that we're not doing enough to make you all feel supported. So I went out and I bought a pride flag and a trans flag from Amazon and hung them up in my classroom in a prominent position right near the American flag so everyone could see them. That was a really clear statement on my part to say that students in this community are welcome here. Students in this community are empowered here. Students in this community belong here. So that was one effort that I took to increase diversity, and you better believe that spawned some conversation. And it wasn't always positive, happy conversation, like, hey, good for you for doing that. Sometimes there were tough conversations that had to be had about why I put up that flag and not a different flag, or so on and so forth. But that's part of the diversity exploration. That's part of growing and building and learning. So I want you to think right now, as we get ready to go back to school, whether it's next month or next year, think about what your classroom looks like. Think about what kind of representation you have. Do you have posters that show black faces, brown faces? Do you have inclusive, like Ivy said, she has a safe space sticker, which is a Q+ thing on her door. And if you don't have diverse representation, challenge yourself. Think, what could I bring to my classroom to make everyone feel welcome, accepted, and empowered? Emma, do you have a question?
I had a comment.
Yes.
So, while I was saying all this, I also, like the beautiful closing of the eyes moment, I realized that I have things in my room. I think we all have motivational posters that actually are exclusive, because has anybody seen the equity graphic where you have one person, a white child on a bigger platform and a black child, and they're both kind of over a fence, but one's got a lower platform. So we teach skills, we teach about what you need to be successful. And I realized that I think I've got motivational posters in my room that are like, the only thing in your way is you know, your attitude. And I think it's exclusive if we're saying to all students, the only thing in your way, the only barrier you have is your attitude or your skill set. When some students at birth don't have the start that others do. And so I think it's important to know, I'm not saying tear all that stuff down, I'm just saying that just to think about, I'm starting to think about, okay, maybe that stuff is exclusive. So it's important to bring diversity into the room and also maybe think about what kids are seeing might be exclusive or a microaggression, for instance, in a poster version or as I said.
Thank you very much for sharing that and for your vulnerability. I think that's the work that we're hoping that we all can do as an employee of JMG, is to just think really critically about every action that we take, every decoration that we put up in our classroom. Is it intentional in some way? What is it doing to help? Is it doing anything to harm? And how do we manage that? So thank you for sharing that. It's been fun. But I've got a debrief question, and we're going to do this really quick because I think we're running over on time. Just a little bit? Yes, okay, a lot of it. So I'm going to have you think about this. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. What are some ways that your school celebrates diversity and culture right now? So you have 60 seconds to think and talk at your table. If you get there, go.
Except language pod does their, what am I trying to say?
Their,
around,
huh?
What holiday they celebrate there. I think our foreign language. Yeah.
They do that, but you have to be in a foreign language class to celebrate.
That's right.
I really don't think the GSA Club tries to do the data science. They try to do primary, but we don't do well. You wouldn't. But we don't do, I mean, I've never thought we did anything.
Maybe that's something JMG needs to
All right, that was a very short minute, but we're going to bring it back. I'm looking to hear from two of you. I'm going to take two. I'm going to try to keep it to 60 seconds or less for your answer. So I have two volunteers to tell me what are some ways that your school celebrates diversity and culture. And if no one volunteers, I will call on you. Okay.
At Lewiston High School, the art teacher just had the students create murals all along the bottom floor of people of color who have impacted our world, as well as other historians, for instance, Abraham Lincoln. So we have, and Martin Luther King. So we have lots of murals around the school.
Awesome. Murals and art. Love it. One more person. All the way over there.
A couple years ago at Mahoney Middle School, I helped create a recipe book based on ethnicities in our school. So we sold it as a fundraiser. So we had students kind of submit recipes from there. I think we even went further and we had a night where we actually did all the recipes and people came and we did a fundraiser like that.
Awesome. Recipe book. Love it. All right. It's been real, it's been fun, but I'm going to pass it off to my friend, Kaylin.
Hi friends, I'm Kaylin. I'm at Deering High School. I just started with y'all in February, and I'm going to talk to you, actually, let's chat. We're going to chat about equity today. We need to keep equity in mind, especially when we're going back in a time where we don't know what our classrooms are going to look like, what our days are going to look like, what anything is going to look like. We need to talk about the students that we're working with and how are they having equitable and just access to the services that they need. Or, in general, just being at the same playing field as the rest of their peers. So, I'm not going to let you guys discuss at your table because y'all talk a lot and I have a lot to say, but I do want you to think about what is equity in your mind? What does equity look like in your classroom? What is equity to you? Got it? It's in there? Okay, good. All right, so for us, we're defining it as equity is giving everybody what they need to be successful. Because not all students are starting at the same place, and we need to provide modifications for that. So if you have a student who may be socioeconomically disadvantaged, thinking about things like, well, if I'm going to take a field trip and I'm asking the students to take the metro with me, what does this mean? Do I need to call central office beforehand to make sure that I have a bus pass for that student? And I slip it to them, like not, really obvious, to make sure that they have that so they don't need to worry. Or having them in your desk and having it as a very natural thing that anybody can access this. And the big thing about JMG that I really love is that we're all about meeting our students where we're at. Like if we're starting down here, we're kneeling down with them, we're trying to understand their perspective, and we're trying to figure out how can we make this more equitable and just for them. Has anybody seen the tree meme? Has anybody seen the tree? Show hands, yes, no, so? Okay. So we're going to talk about equity when it comes to my favorite thing, which is food, and that's actually going to be accessing the lunchroom. So everybody knows I love chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. That usually happens on Thursday at Deering High School, so I'm in the cafeteria at that time every day. We're going to talk about equity and justice when it comes to accessing the school lunchroom, and I want you to keep this tree as like a visual. And I also have a story to go along with this, because like I said, I like to talk a lot, and I've had like 5 cups of coffee, so sometimes I talk a little fast, so tell me if I need to slow down. All right, so when it comes to, we're gonna say Joanna and Destiny. They're in the Portland School District. We know that in the Portland School District, we have a lottery system. You have your 3 picks of what you want to do, where you want to go. Joanna and Destiny get their first pick, and they're at, like their top pick for the school, well-funded. We'll say this isn't necessarily, like in Portland, but it's a well-funded area somewhere in Maine, and they got their top pick. So Joanna is coming from a well-funded, affluent neighborhood, and Destiny isn't necessarily coming from that same background. She has 2 working parents, there may be times where she might not have the same resources, and I want you to keep that in mind as we're accessing something as basic as the school lunchroom. So we get to the first day of school, and we're like, okay, we're doing great. We have this lunchroom, it's great. It's mac and cheese day. They haven't added chicken nuggets yet. So Destiny and Joanna go to access this lunchroom. And Joanna gets lunch money from her family every day. So we got the money in hand, we walk up, we go in, we're like, okay, let's go get our mac and cheese. I'm really excited for this. Where are the chicken nuggets? Well, they'll be coming a few weeks later. We won't worry about it now. But Joanna is able to go into the lunchroom and say, okay, here's my money, here's my tray, I'm gonna go back to my seat now. Destiny walks in and is like, ooh, I forgot my lunch money, but I don't wanna be uncool and not sit with my friends, so I'm just gonna tell them that I'm not hungry. So Destiny does not have a way to access, and it is inequitable because there is no free or reduced lunch at this school at this time. Is that okay? If everybody has access to the lunchroom, they can walk in, but can they access the lunchroom in the same way? No. Joanna gets an allowance for lunch, and Destiny doesn't have that option, even though Destiny has 2 working parents. So something to keep in mind when we're going back to school, just because the lunchroom is there, doesn't mean that there's equitable access for everybody. But we've made a solution. We have added a free and reduced lunch program. The school is rocking it. They're making changes. They're listening to the peeps. We've given 2 accommodations. We have added a free and reduced lunch program now. We're doing great, right? Well, Joanna walks in and has her money. She's able to pay. That's totally fine. Awesome. We celebrate that. They have added chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. It's Thursday. It's a good day in my book. Destiny walks up and tries to tell the lunch monitor, I have free and reduced lunch rate. The lunch monitor then says really loudly, you can't access that tray with the free and reduced lunch in front of a line full of students who are trying to get their food. Just because the free and reduced lunch program is there doesn't mean that it is equitable yet. But we added this. We gave the 2 ladders. We gave them a way to access this. But is it enough? No, because you still have a student, just because the resource is there, just because the tool was given in an equal way, doesn't mean that your student can still access this equitably and just. So keep this in mind. So, we're gonna try again. Now we've added mac and cheese, we got some chicken nuggets, and now we have my favorite corn on the cob. Oh my gosh, it's a good day. We put a little butter on there. This is my favorite lunch day. So we have now added a custom tool. You can access the lunch free and reduced program if you sign up for it before the first bell. Custom solution, we did so well. Here's the thing. Joanna is able to drive herself to school every single day. She's able to get there early. She's able to access her teachers who can give her extra help in the things that she's struggling in. Destiny, if she's lucky, she can get a ride in a few days a week from her parents, but is unable to get to school early to sign up for free and reduced lunch. But you just have to do it before the first bell. First bell, which in high school is at 10:45. Who eats lunch at 10:45? I cannot, even if it's mac and cheese and chicken nuggets. But Destiny is struggling in math class right now, and it's before the bell, but she needs help. She needs to choose right now, even with this custom tool, whether or not she stays and gets help with her teacher because she can't get there early because she has to take the bus, or, yet again, Destiny's gonna go without food. So we're at day 3 now. This is my favorite food. This is not great. Because of course, when you have a student who isn't eating it in your class, or maybe a little hangry, you know, it's not going well, learning isn't happening. But even though the school has this custom tool, there still is inequity, and there still is the inability for this student to access this resource. So how many of us think we're done here? We've done all that we can humanly do for the student. Anybody? Okay. I'm feeling like more people have seen this picture, just not telling me, but it's okay. All right. So let's look at justice now. We have created a custom solution, but what else have we done? We have changed the system, and systemic change is what is making this equitable and just for our students. So we're looking at Joanna and Destiny. Joanna maybe hasn't noticed a huge change, but she has noticed this school has now introduced a breakfast program. They now have hired a consultant that has translated the form into the 15 most common languages that are spoken at the school, so it is accessible for multiple languages. They have also included a bunch of different ways in which you can sign up for lunch. There's a bus line, so you can sign up on the bus if the bus is running late. You can sign up on the app. There are 100 different ways you can do this, but they have to look inside themselves, and they have to look as a system, what are we still missing in order to support the rest of these students? And that's something as simple as accessing the lunchroom. Now think about this in larger forms. What other systems are our students needing to access that are not equitable and just for them? And something that's really important to remember is that just because you have equity and you've achieved that equity with that custom solution doesn't mean that there is justice. Or you have created a just system but does not mean that there is equity. They're not mutually exclusive, and just because you have one doesn't mean that you have the other. And that's what we need to dig for. And sometimes that's really hard because we need to take those sunglasses off that everything is rose colored and we have, you know, like all the tools and all the solutions. And sometimes we may not. The only reason in this story that Destiny was able to access this was because she advocated for herself. She went into the office, she talked to the assistant principal, she let the system know what was not working for her. Not a lot of kids have that option, not a lot of kids know how to advocate for themselves like that. I will share, which I did not share with the last group, this was actually my experience in school. So this was something that I had to do for myself, and this was really hard to be able to walk into a school and say like, hey, just because you have the lunchroom here doesn't actually mean that I get to eat every day. Or times where I would forget my lunch because I lived over an hour away. And that was in a private school, and private schools don't have to do this. I was very lucky to have gotten scholarships to do this, very lucky to have created a program, but it was still inequitable, and it was still not just in the way that I was trying to access this basic resource. So as we're thinking about our classrooms, and as we're thinking about how we're working with our students this year, just because we think we've achieved the equity doesn't necessarily mean we have the justice. And just because we have the justice doesn't mean we necessarily have the equity. But we need to listen to the voices of the people who are accessing these resources, or accessing you as a resource, in order to find those solutions for them. Does that make sense? I talked fast and a lot because I know you guys probably want to go on break, and all I'm thinking about is chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, to be honest. So, when we're meeting students where they're at, things to keep in mind. Find ways to get to know your students and their supportive systems, as well as their families. So one thing that I noticed in my own classroom, in my very short experience that I got to be in the classrooms before the Rona hit, was that none of my forms were parent neutral. I have a lot of kids in my class that do not identify as having a parent figure. So I just made my forms more parent neutral to make them feel more equitable and to make them feel more included in my classroom. And I made sure that that was a huge point for me. Again, make sure you're being open to learn more about your students' cultures and how you can incorporate that into your classroom. You may think every year, yes, I think I've done it. I think I've become the most equitable and the most just and the most inclusive and the most diverse, and then someone's gonna walk in and say, well, this is my culture. And you're like, well, I didn't know that, so let's figure it out. How do I make you a part of this classroom and make you feel comfortable? Make sure that you're embracing all aspects of your students' identities and giving them opportunities to share that with the classroom environment. So if you're doing, like a project where it's talking about like where you came from, what are your career goals, what are your values and things like that, make sure that there's equitable, just, diverse, and inclusive space for them to be able to do that. Understanding that diversity and inclusion doesn't mean that you have equity and justice, and that is very, very important, and you really need to listen to the voices in your room. And then lastly, when creating classroom cultures, to be very aware of how inclusion works both ways. That means, like if you're sharing part of your culture, like say that you're teaching about, like maybe something that pops up as a tradition for your family or something like that, or for you specifically. It goes both ways. They're learning about that, you're learning about that, and that doesn't necessarily mean that your student needs to assimilate to the way that your classroom is. It's about incorporating and finding ways to add more, if that makes sense. All right, a little discussion. I'm gonna give you like 0.7 seconds, because that's all I got for you right now. How do you incorporate your students' culture into your classroom? Think about it. Is it in there? I told you 0.7 seconds. That's all I got for you right now. All right, and with that, I am going to give this back to Jess.
So we're going to give you guys about 10 minutes, so if you could come back to your seats like around 9:30.
Burn 10 minutes.
What's that? Burn 10 minutes, okay? Ready to go.
Thank you, everybody. The next piece of what we're going to get into, and we actually skip by some slides, is social justice in action. We are all aware of the news over the last few months. There's a lot of heavy things that are going on in the United States right now, and I think there's a lot within our culture, and the more I've spoken individually with folks over the last few days, everything's just a little bit extra, right? We all have extra things going on in our lives. There's extra things to think about when it comes to returning to school this year. There's the coronavirus, there's parenting, there's 1,000 things that we're all kind of working through, and social justice is just one more of those things that we're all working through. We've talked this morning about impact versus intent. We're going to talk a little bit more about some phrases and some movements where impact and intent are really important. It's important to know when we say certain things, how are those things impacting the students in our classroom. Our intent can be the best. Everybody in this room doesn't work for J&J. They didn't become educators because they have mean spirits, right? We care about kids. We care about the kids that we come encounter with, whether we're a high school completion specialist, a pathway navigator, or a classroom specialist. We all care about the students that we get to cross our paths. So intent and impact is really important. When I watched the first time I watched the Microaggressions video, there were things that I was like, ooh, have I said those things? Have I done something like that? And my intent was never to be hurtful. Like, I can own that. I know I didn't want to be hurtful, but I also need to own the impact of those words. And so we're going to talk about this and dive a little bit deeper in a few minutes. We are very fortunate within our organization to have storytelling be a piece of our culture. And in a few minutes, you're going to hear from some of our committee members who are willing to share their story around the Black Lives Matter movement and the social justice and how it affects them. This is their perspective, this is their story. And similar to what Michelle was saying, this is for them to share with us. And we're fortunate to have that among our family and among us as professionals. So I really am thankful for their courage and their words and their power to say what they have to say today. I think I'm going to leave it at that, actually. So I'd like to introduce TJ and Maria to come on up.
My name is TJ. I'm from Edward Little High School. I'm a high school completion specialist. But before I share my own story, I have a little piece of something that I want Maria to read for me. She's my reading partner, and she's my sister. And she's going to read it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, TJ. Can you hear me okay? So I have the honor of reading a poem that TJ wrote. It's entitled, Don't Treat Me with Kindness. Don't treat me with kindness because you are afraid. Don't treat me with kindness, then lie to my face. Don't treat me with kindness because you see that I'm mad. Don't treat me with kindness because you see I am sad. Don't treat me with kindness because you see my pain. Treat me with kindness because you feel my pain. I'm sorry, I just butchered that. Treat me with kindness because you feel the same. Feel what it is like to be denied for only one reason. Feel what it is like to comply and still take a beating. Feel what it is like to feel helpless in a situation you cannot control. All because of the color of your skin, not what's in your heart, mind, body, and soul. Feel what it's like to be looked at as a criminal. Feel what it's like to have what matters to you thought of as minimal. Feel what it's like to be thought that I'm up to no good if I'm out at night or in your neighborhood. Feel what it's like to be a success and still be a minority, or to have freedom and still not feel free. Feel what it's like to know you do have rights, but will not be acknowledged because I am not white. Feel what it's like to live with honor and integrity day after day, and in a single moment someone's wrong can steal your life away. Feel what it's like to have to always fight for equality. Feel what it's like to be black like me. So don't treat me with kindness only during terrible crimes against blacks. Treat me with kindness because you feel love for me that is not an act. And only because you respect me as a fellow, red-blooded human man, one who doesn't want to be thought of as your black friend. So I'm praying that you hear me when I say this to you, just so you understand. I don't have friends that are white, red, yellow, or brown. I just have friends.
I have a loud voice. I can speak without a microphone. And I cannot start speaking of my story without sharing on how my journey got me to where I am today in JFG. For a lot of you who knows, especially people who are in Lewiston, Auburn, Michelle, and the rest of them, they know me a lot. I started a program, a suspension program for Lewiston School and Auburn School. And this suspension program was very, very successful. And in the process of doing, and we get all our funding comes as a result, we get donations and the city of Auburn give us some money to run the program. But there was a time, I think in 2015 or 2016, that we didn't have money to run the program. And the option was to shut down the program without doing nothing. And I reached out to someone, and someone said, I know somebody that I'm going to reach out to him. And that person, I know that he's going to listen to you. And they sent me an email of Craig's number. And I have dealt with a lot of executive directors, but I was hesitant. I said, maybe I shouldn't call. Maybe this is one of those people who hear and just walk away from you. And I decided to make a call. And I called Craig. And he answered my call. And I said, can I come to meet you in Augusta? He said, no. I am coming to meet you in Lewiston, Auburn. And when he came 3 times, and all of our discussion, he says, your mind, your heart, everything you're saying, I am seeing JMG in you. And with that, I'm going to take my responsibility and I want to invest in you. And to me, it means a lot. For somebody who doesn't know me as a person of color, that was my first meeting with him. And says, I am going to invest in you. And he kept his word. Some people say, I'm going to invest in you. You never see them again. But he kept his words. And to me, why I am here today is as a result of what Craig has done. And it shows me there are people who are interested in investing in people of color. And I want to say thank you to Craig and thank you to JMG for what you did to me. And as a person of color, I work in Lewiston, Auburn. Every policeman in Lewiston, Auburn knows me. They know who I am because I do a lot of diversion programs. I go to the police department, I say, give me these young people. I want to work with these young people. They know me. And they know what I'm doing in Lewiston, Auburn. And even the city of Auburn knows me, the city of Lewiston knows me. Like I remember, even before I stepped my feet into the US, I already got an honorary citizen of Auburn. Because I wrote some article and I sent it to the chief of police and he submitted it to the mayor and they said, we're going to honor you with a citizen. And as I work with the police department, as a person of color, as a black man, I have this good relationship with them. The chief of police in Auburn is my friend. But just of recent, I started having fear of what my life would look like. I was loved by them. I was cared by them. But every time I leave my house, sometimes I tell my wife, I say, can you drive? Because I'm afraid to have encounter with a police officer. I'm afraid what is going to happen after I have my encounter. And my wife will say, yeah, I'll drive. And I have peace when she drives. Because I know that something is not going to happen to me. But every day as I leave my house, my kids see what is happening on TV. They say, Daddy, one of my daughters said, Daddy, why are they treating people like that? And I said to her, it's not every police officer that is bad. It's the same thing with every job. There are people that are bad in that job. There are good police officers. And I remember when Craig invested in me, I had an opportunity to be in Lewiston. I go between 2 schools, Lewiston and Auburn. And that year, if he has not decided to invest in me, there were some kids of color that I worked with them when they were growing up. I think David will know the story. And some of these kids, if I didn't show up in that building because of the investment that Craig has did in me, I bet you that these kids are not going to graduate, and they're not gonna go to the next step in their life. And so it means the investment work. And as I work with them, I was able to help them to get to where they are. What I'm trying to say, as an African man, I drive every day in my life since the whole thing is happening. I'm afraid. And I asked one of my friends who is a Caucasian, he said to me, all of these things you're saying is not true. It doesn't even happen. And I said to him, I said, we're going to do a test drive. You're going to drive your car, and I'm going to drive my car, and we're going to go the same speed, follow the same street. If you know where Shirley's is in Lewiston, where the Lewiston Mall is a double length. And I said to him, you drive on the other lane, I drive on the other lane. And he said, yeah, let's do it. On the way, and I told him, I said, watch. There was a police officer parked by the side. And I said to him, watch what is going to happen. And I put my windows down, and he put his windows down. And as we passed this police officer, I told him, watch. I was talking on the phone, I said, watch. Immediately, there was a siren behind me. And I pulled over. And the question the policeman was asking me, your headlight is not on. And I was wondering, how did you see my headlight was not on behind my car? And I was really, really calm because I know what is going to happen. And the reason why I'm sharing my story, you have students that are coming back into the school. A lot of kids of color, they have story. Like yesterday I said to people, the girl who organized the Black Lives Matter movement in Lewiston, Auburn is a JMU student. She's one of my students. She organized a protest with 700 people in attendance, teachers, staff, principals. Everybody was in that place. And I showed up there. I didn't go because I wanted to do the protest. I go there so that my students should not put themselves in trouble in the process of doing what is good. I want you to speak to these young people who are coming back to school, to tell them what you feel. It is okay for them to do the protest, but you don't do protest, you don't exchange good with bad. And I have my own story. I come from a country where I come from a family where I have generals in my home, I have police officers in my home, I have presidents from my own family background. I have never been afraid in my life about policemen and police until this time in America. I'm scared. I don't know what is going to happen to me. Every day, I just live one day at a time. And this morning I wake up, I was listening to a song, it says one day at a time. Just help me to do what I want to do. And in my mind I say, I'm just going to walk one day at a time. There are good police people. There are good policemen and women that I know. But there are other ones that are not even good. I finish my story with, I just can't explain the investment that was done on me as a person of color. The life that today is affected in Lewiston and Auburn is an honor and a privilege to be part of this organization. Thank you so much.
I think what's super important for us to remember as we're talking about equity, inclusion, and diversity in our classrooms and the students that we're serving and the faculty that we may be working with in the school, what's so important is that we remember that our students have these stories as well, and we need to make a classroom environment where they feel safe and they feel included and they feel that if this is something where they're still afraid for their lives every day, that they feel like they matter. I don't feel like Black Lives Matter when I have to change my walking route in my neighborhood because I have a woman who keeps asking me for my ID because the neighborhood is too nice for me to live there. It doesn't feel like Black Lives Matter when my windows are smashed in for having a Black Lives Matter poster in my car. It doesn't feel like Black Lives Matter when I get thrown over the hood at 16 of a state trooper's car when he was looking for a 5'8" Caucasian female in a drug investigation. But he just needed to check that I was okay. It doesn't feel like Black Lives Matter when I was little and the KKK came to our house and threw bricks through and I had one hit me in the back of my head and I wear that scar and that hate for the rest of my life. It does not feel like Black Lives Matter. And you have students who feel this every single day. Just because it feels like you can turn the news off and stop looking at it doesn't mean that with the way that I look, with my skin, I can't turn that off. I can't turn off the fact that I take a different walking route to accommodate somebody else for feeling comfortable with me living in the place in which I pay for. I do not feel like Black Lives Matter when the leading cause of death around African American men is the police, being 2 times more likely to have a negative outcome. It doesn't feel like Black Lives Matter when I am still telling you this in the year of 2020. It doesn't feel like Black Lives Matter, even though my grandparents were the first people to bring Malcolm X to the UN and see that transformation. And they fought as civil rights advocates years ago, what feels like. But yet in 2020, I still need to take a different walking route because someone feels uncomfortable with me in their neighborhood. It does not feel like Black Lives Matter. It does not feel like Black Lives Matter when I have to make accommodations for somebody else to feel comfortable just because I look different. You have students like this in your classroom, and it's so important for you to remember that they are living with this every single day. They don't get to turn it off just because you get to turn the news off. This is their everyday. These are the choices they make when they wake up. These are the choices they make before they go to bed, before they go to bed at the end of the night. That's what's important to know. That constant fear of, is my dad going to come home? Do I have that opportunity to see him at the end of the night? I'm someone who I had the opportunity, because my grandparents were from, the New York area, I got to go to New York all the time, but I also was around a lot of gang violence when I was younger. I've been shot at more than 10 times before I was the age of 15. And I understand that that is a part of what happens, but that still is Black Lives Do Not Matter because they are not being protected in those areas. It still does not feel like that happens. And I still do not feel like I matter when I have to ask you to help me speak up to feel like I matter. So understand that your students are feeling this every single day and creating that diversity and inclusion in that classroom and that equity to be at the same spot as their peers, to feel that safety, that they don't need to make accommodations to just make somebody feel comfortable. And that's what's so important about this movement. And that's what's so important with us as JMG specialists, that we can be that support to make sure that we have those conversations in the classroom to make sure kids feel that inclusivity, that kids feel that diversity, that kids feel that equity to have the conversation. And that's the biggest piece, and that's what we want to give you tools about all the time. I can tell you stories until the cows come home, and I'm 27, and I don't even know what else I can have for stories for my mom. My mom is 63. That is not even as old as she's had the legal right to vote without voter intimidation at the polls when the act came through in 1965. I can't imagine what my grandmother went through. I can't imagine, but that ancestral trauma is still there and still is with us today. The fact that they were civil rights activists then and we're still doing it now, and we still don't feel like we matter as people. Just take that in, and that's really important to bring back to your classrooms and conversation. You are going to have students who might not speak up, but there may be a student who makes a comment that makes someone feel like they don't matter and they don't belong in your classroom, and we want to equip you with the tools to be able to have that conversation so that other student can see that perspective, because it may just be the same, and that's what's important. Thank you.
I was asked to share a story that I have about a student of mine. I am the daughter of a retired police officer. I teach in a very small town. The police department in Richmond has about 3 officers. And it is not a racially diverse town at all. So I have a student that I spoke with about a year ago, a JMU student, that you can imagine has known every police officer in the town through elementary school. They're in our schools all the time. They know everyone. So I had to have a conversation with this student about Black Lives Matter and about differences in the city that he was going to college at, and just ways to stay safe. So that's something that I just want to have us be educated about these issues so that we can meet all our students where they're at.
The question on the slide is just something we want you to think about as you've heard these stories. And thank you to the 3 specialists that came up to share their perspectives and their point of view. But as you leave today and as you go into the classrooms, there's going to be 1,000 things that we're thinking about. But what is one action item that you can do around diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice within your schools and communities? What is something that you can be doing? And if you feel compelled to, email them to our team, and that's something that we can share out so ideas can continue to be shared. We're not doing another break.
Good morning again. My role is to talk to you a little bit about some action items. So first I want to start off with a quote from Shirley Chisholm. Shirley is, or was, the first African-American woman to serve in Congress and the first woman and African-American to seek nomination for the presidency. Of her legacy, she said, "I want to be remembered as a woman who dared to be a catalyst of change." My wish is that you all dare to be catalysts for change in your community, your classrooms, and our state. We want you to take action against prejudice, bias, and stereotypes. So how do we do that? If you're feeling ill-prepared, I want you to learn about the issues. Take time to do that. If you feel uncomfortable with the topic, embrace it. I always tell my students that the magic happens when we step out of our comfort zone. Be a role model for your students and show them the power of being uncomfortable and learning and growing. If you feel isolated, seek out a colleague or two. Any one of us are here as a resource and support for you. If you feel unable to answer students' questions, take time and learn with them. Show them how to seek out primary resources to dispel myths. Show them how to research. And it's okay to say, "I don't know." Don't make it up as you go along. Show them the process. Martin Luther King said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." So it's really important as GMG specialists that we're role models and we not only act to eliminate injustice, but we equip our students to do so, and how to communicate calmly, respectfully, and clearly with diverse audiences. So what are some strategies for doing that? We need to first establish a classroom that is safe. We can do that by creating class contracts at the beginning of the year. And one strategy is as a class decide on words and phrases that will commit to not using and positive phrases that we will use. Educate students. Teach them about microaggressions, hurtful words, unpack language that might need teaching them the historical context of certain words. Group work. We're ahead of the game here. This is what JMG is known for. Teaching tolerance says that creating groups of diverse people, gender, race, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation. This is one of the leading ways to overcome bias. We need to be role models. We need to immediately and consistently address hurtful language and misconceptions. And there are a number of phrases that you can use to do that. They're on the slide. I'm not going to read them to you. You all can read. What I'd like to do is share a story about two of my students. Last year, we were doing an activity around child slave labor in the cacao industry. They had to read an article to prepare for a certain activity on perspective taking. Two students, because they have a lower reading ability, needed to use a text-to-speech function. And they didn't have earbuds, so they went to another room. They came back, and one of the students was very upset, and she's like, I can't be in this room, and she walked out. Went out, I said, talk to me, what's going on? She's like, you won't understand. And she said, I'll stand here, I'm not gonna leave, but I can't go back in that room. So I talked to the other student, what happened? I don't know. So the next day I went to my assistant administrator. We got the student. She said something's up. She wouldn't normally do that. So we called the student to the office. That student had been called the N-word, I can't even say that word, by the other student. And that's why she could not go back into my classroom. My administrator and I sat there with this student as she sobbed and said, you just don't understand. She's right. We don't understand. But here's where the magic happened. Devin, my administrator, called mom with the student there, told her what was going on, and she said, this is what I'm going to do. So her next step was to meet with the student who used the slur. The student admitted to it. Devin called the mom. Mom was very upset, and she was totally on board. She said, I'm going to pull up some documentaries for her and her brother to watch at home. Devin coached the student and educated the student as well. We also worked with one of the social workers to bring the two girls together to talk it through. Cassidy explained how she felt and what that word meant to her. The other student, Brooke, really took it in and really began to understand the depth of the harm in using that word. Because we had a team, administrators, social workers, parents on board, and students who were willing to be vulnerable because they were supported in their vulnerability. A lot of powerful work happened over the course of a few days. And I'm really pleased to say that those students were able to come back into my classroom and sit side by side and continue to work together. I could read to you these statements, but I feel that that story is more powerful in addressing things immediately as they happen. And the power that can happen when we unpack the harm, rather than just saying, don't say that. I don't want to hear that word. We're educators, we need to educate the meaning behind those words. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about empowering yourself. Coming up, we'll have another professional development opportunity for you, which is the 10-day Racial Equity Challenge. It is 10 days of activities, movies, and articles, and a day of observation. Each activity will take you no more than 20 minutes. And at the end, it'll conclude with a Zoom with your regional manager so that you can discuss and unpack what you've learned. JMG is also going to purchase you a book of your choosing so that you may learn more about racism. 5 of the titles here, these were pulled from the New York Times bestseller list. Or, if you prefer, you can learn about African American history through either America Behind the Color Line or Between the World and Me. Those are both books. The African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross is a PBS series that you may choose to watch. And also, Karen created a resource bank, which is available on the internet that you can tap into. It's going to be a living, breathing document that we will continue to add to as time goes on. And we also invite you to share resources with us. If you come across something that you find valuable, let us know, and it'll get added to the resource bank.
Close of our training this morning, and we just want to wrap things up at your table with just one last discussion here. Accidents, questions, not right. The question should be a little different than what's on here. So basically, from what you've learned today or picked up today through this training, what's one thing that you might commit to doing in order to create a more inclusive classroom when you go back to your classroom? Something that you've heard, something that struck you today when we were talking. So take a couple of minutes to talk, and then we'll ask for some people to share out.
We really liked the fact that our specialists are talking about their experience and how we could bring that back to our classroom if this was taped, which it is. And I don't know if that's an option, just to, as we know, trying to make it relatable to them. We felt like this was a great example of that. So if that's an option, if everyone's willing, that's something that might be interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something, and even today, I've heard the stories a couple of times because of doing this presentation. That was one of the thoughts that went through my head today as well, like that this is so powerful that we don't want it to be stagnant at Sugarloaf, right? We want to be able to share it and bring it further beyond this message. Yeah. So I think that's a good idea, Cheryl. Yeah.
Okay, Billy.
We talked about just really listening more to our students and to these stories, learning as much as we can about what's going on, and also just knowing that this doesn't stop here, this continues, and there's a lot of resources that you found and that we will find or learn about, and just to continue to learn about it.
Great. And bringing that up, I think JMG is committed. This is not like your diversity training, check the box, we did it. We're going to commit to this work, and we're going to be doing it throughout the year. This team will be bringing you lots of different information, training, so it's something that we're committed to keep doing. Okay. Well, why don't we just wrap up here. So hopefully we hit all of our learning objectives today, and you feel a little bit better equipped with some tools and things to learn about to bring back to your classroom. Before I hand it over to Craig, does anybody have an aha moment today? Maybe something that kind of came up that you never thought about before, or you might think differently about now? Any sort of aha moments? Would love to hear them.
I just want to thank TJ, for his story. That was probably one of the highlights of this time here, and just the emotion that he expressed, and it kind of got me feeling emotional too. So, just thank you all. It was great.
Thank you. Anybody else? Julie?
I'll just say, like I echo what Josh just said,
these stories. I had a student this year that was not knowing that I sent a cop to his house to get him out of bed to make sure he graduated. And he called me up, he's like, thank you so much, but it scared the heck out of me. I didn't even think of it that way. You know what I mean? And we had a nice conversation about it. He goes, I know there was no, and he goes, all you were trying to do is get me the thing, but he goes, but also on the other side, and I was like, taken back, like, I never even thought of it that way. And just having these conversations and opening these up, it's great to have dialogue so you can understand where nothing malicious was meant, but how it can be taken different ways. And just having these conversations is great, and I appreciate everybody on the panel having these conversations because we need to have more of them. And we just need to be open to things.
Great. It leads me to two things. My favorite quote from Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better, right? When your eyes are open to these things, and that happens through conversation. And another thing, intent versus impact, right? You didn't intend for it to bring up, you wouldn't think that it would bring up those scary, fearful feelings for that student, but you don't have that perspective of being a Black student, so that's great. Okay. All right, so thank you everybody so much for participating and opening your minds and listening to what we had to present today. I do want to bring Craig up to kind of wrap things up.
As Craig makes his way, round of applause for our committee members who are
I definitely want to thank this tremendous group of people, this team sitting behind me that is going to make a huge difference in all of our lives, our company, the kids. So again, really appreciate your leadership on this topic, these topics. And as Jess said, this is not a one and done, this is not episodical, this is a commitment. This is going to be a #1 professional development initiative of our organization now for the foreseeable future. We've got a lot more to learn. We've got a lot more story that we need to hear. There's many, many opportunities to provide leadership to our school partners and make a difference for thousands and thousands of young people. I was just had to leave at 8:30 to deal with some other issues, and just a quick story just to give you a sense of how we can make a difference. We have a young man that's on one of our college campuses, former JMG student, is in our college success program. And he's been on social media making statements, negative statements about the LGBTQ community. And he's also an RA at that campus. The president of the college called me to say that she's firing him as the RA. That's not the leadership that she's looking for. And that she's asking for me and her and some others to sit down with this young gentleman to see if we can get him to understand the importance of understanding, listening, not being bigoted, the discrimination piece, all the things that we're talking about here. If we make this a bigger part of our curriculum and what we're doing with our students, hopefully we won't have more situations like that where students are basically ruining their brand, their social media brand, and potentially hurting their opportunities for success in the future. So a lot riding on this work. It's the right thing for us to be concentrating on. The 10-day, right? The challenge, we're going back and forth. I am asking, I hate saying the word mandatory, but it is, we really want you to do the 10-day challenge. It's going to set the groundwork for future conversations. I think it's important that everyone, not just specialists, but managers, people in the central office, we all go through the 10-day challenge, and we have that as a footprint, part of our footprint as we move this work forward. Okay. Before I turn it back over to Matt, on a separate note, in a couple of conversations, I've been on the phone a lot this morning. A superintendent I have a lot of respect for told me this morning, I don't know if you guys have been reading the papers of what's going on in Bangor High School, Portland High School. In Bangor, they're making return to school the parent's decision. So the parent is to decide whether their kid's going to go back to school or not. In Portland, there was a big meeting last night where teachers came forward saying, a lot of teachers came forward saying they're not going back. Parents saying they want their kids back in school. So anyway, the short story, hopefully the short story here is, this superintendent said to me that it's going to take about 2 weeks probably for the dust to settle. So when school starts and it's back in person, you know, the fact that we might only see, even if it's a hybrid, you may only see maybe half the students there or half the teachers there. There's going to be some time for people to either feel comfortable to send their kids back or comfortable to come back to work, get a feel for how it's going. So there could be changes. Your school could be telling you right now, this is your schedule, this is what we're asking you to do. And by day 3, they could say, no, this is not your schedule, we need you to do this. It is going to be a level of chaos that we've never seen in public education. And I just want you to try to get your mind wrapped around so that you don't get overly frustrated or overwhelmed in those situations. That one, JMG is here to support you, your managers of central office. We will talk to superintendents, we'll talk to principals and administration, we'll be there to support you through this chaos, but that's the reality. And if you can't get your head there, work on that in the next couple of weeks of thinking about what it's going to be like going into that environment and energy that's going to be in that environment, positive energy and negative energy, and how JMG can make a difference for these students. So I wish I could say I'm looking forward to this. I'm not. I'm sure you're not either. But let's make sure that we recognize what we're up against. So, thank you all. Good to see you. Here's Matt.
Everybody hear me okay? So thank you again to the IDA committee. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but this is something. Some of the next steps here will be us thinking about what is the next training. I can't remember, I may have missed it. We are going to be getting feedback. We want to get feedback from all the regions about this, about needs you may have, questions you may have, and that's going to really help how we sculpt future training. So thank you very much for your participation with this, as well as really the whole 24 hours that we've been here. I know this has felt different. We're kind of in the closing remarks section of our agenda. You guys are going to be transitioning to your divisional workshops to close things out. But I just want to thank this group for really the last day or so. You guys have had just great attitudes. You've had really good questions. You've been engaged. You've leaned into the uncertainty. I know for some of you, just coming here was probably may have produced some anxiety or some question marks. And there's a lot of question marks left to go. I hope you guys still enjoy that you have a full, close to a full month of summer, that you're still taking that time to recharge. If you've got time with your family, you're taking that vacation with intent still. So I really want to thank you guys, and I hope, again, as I started, I hope you guys sort of drive away, even though things felt different, that you're driving away with a sense of empowerment, you're motivated, you're excited. And really want to just thank everybody for the last 24 hours. Is there any questions or comments or things before you guys transition to your divisionals? I want to give you guys as much time. Again, we will have bagged lunches up in Maple. You guys will grab your lunches and exit through that beach area. Don't be exiting down through the stairs, because the central will be coming up shortly afterwards. So I know that, again, is different. And you guys I want to give you, again, as much time at your your divisional, so you've got that full hour. Any other questions, comments? So, you guys look at your agenda. So, the ward division, you guys are going to be in the Kara Bassett room, which is in the hotel. You'll go through the hotel, and it will